The hotel receipt fell out of Jill's purse like a confession written in corporate letterhead. $243 at the Marriott downtown, last Tuesday. The same Tuesday she'd told me she was working late at the dental office, cleaning Mrs. Patterson's dentures or whatever the hell dental hygienists do after hours. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I stood in our garage at midnight, holding that piece of paper like it might bite me. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across my tool bench and the half-finished cabinet I'd been building for our anniversary. Funny how quickly wood projects become kindling. Cole? Jill's voice drifted from the kitchen. What are you doing out there? Just thinking, I called back, shoving the receipt into my work shirt pocket. About construction stuff. That wasn't entirely a lie. I was thinking about construction, specifically the demolition of my marriage. And like any good contractor, I needed to assess the damage before I could plan the rebuild, or in this case, the complete teardown. I'd found the receipt while looking for her car keys. She'd asked me to grab them from her purse, sweet as pie, while she took a shower. Classic mistake. Never trust a cheating wife to handle her own evidence. The shower was still running upstairs. Steam would be fogging the bathroom mirror, and Jill would be humming that annoying song she'd picked up from somewhere. These days, she hummed a lot, smiled more, bought new clothes, all the telltale signs of a woman getting attention from someone who wasn't her husband. I walked back into the house, past the kitchen where we'd eaten 1,000 meals together, past the living room where we'd watched movies and argued about the thermostat. Everything looked the same, but it felt different now, like walking through a museum of my own life. Find them? Jill called from upstairs. Yeah, got them. I sat on the couch and pulled out my phone. Her purse was still on the counter, and curiosity ruined more than cats. It destroyed marriages too, but mine was already circling the drain. Her phone was face down next to her purse. The screen lit up with a text message. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. BK, BK. Brad Keaton. I'd heard that name recently. Brad Keaton. Jill's high school sweetheart. The one who got away and moved to California to make his fortune in tech. According to Donna, Jill's gossip-loving best friend, Brad had recently moved back to town. Rich, divorced, and apparently very interested in reconnecting with old flames. The shower shut off upstairs. I put her phone back exactly where I'd found it and walked back to the garage. My hands were shaking, and I needed something to do with them before I punched a hole in the drywall. I picked up a wrench and pretended to work on my toolbox organization. It was a stupid task, but it kept my hands busy while my mind raced. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of building something together, and she was tearing it down for some high school fantasy. Cole? Jill appeared in the garage doorway, wrapped in her pink bathrobe. Her hair was wet, and she smelled like that expensive shampoo she'd started buying. Are you okay? You seem tense. I looked at her, really looked at her. When had she started wearing makeup to bed? When had she started caring so much about her appearance for evening showers? Just tired, I said. Long day. She walked over and put her arms around me from behind. Once that gesture would have melted away any stress from my day. Now it felt like a performance. Maybe we should take a vacation, she said, resting her chin on my shoulder. Get away from everything. Remember what we're about. The irony was thick enough to choke on. She wanted to remember what we were about while she was busy forgetting it with Brad Keaton. Maybe, I said. When's good for you? After your next work conference? She stiffened slightly. There hadn't been any work conferences lately, but she'd been gone 3 evenings last week for various work events. We should probably wait until things calm down at the office, she said, stepping back. Dr. Martinez has been really demanding lately. Dr. Martinez, her boss, the guy who'd been running the same small dental practice for 20 years and had never demanded overtime from anyone in his life. Sure, I said. No rush. She kissed my cheek and headed back inside. I waited until I heard her footsteps on the stairs before I pulled out my own phone and did something I'd never thought I'd do. I started investigating my own wife. Facebook showed me everything I needed to know. Brad Keaton's profile was public, and he wasn't shy about his success. Photos of his downtown penthouse, his BMW, his expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. And there, in his recent photos, was a familiar face. Jill, at some charity event last week. She was wearing the black dress I'd complimented her on, the one she'd said she wore to a work thing. They weren't touching in the photo, but they were standing close. Too close. And they were both smiling like they shared a secret. The comments on the photo were even more damning. "Great seeing you both!" And "You two look so happy together," and "Some things never change." I scrolled through more photos. Brad at the Rusty Wrench, our local dive bar. Brad at the farmer's market. Brad at places where he might run into Jill, where they might have accidental encounters that led to coffee, then lunch, then hotel rooms. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike, my best friend and fellow contractor. "Beer tomorrow? Sarah's working late, and I need to complain about the Patterson job." I texted back, "Yeah, I need to complain about something too." I put my phone away and looked around the garage. This had been my sanctuary for 15 years. My workshop, my space, my place to build things that lasted. Now, it felt like a tomb. I walked over to the anniversary cabinet and ran my hand along the smooth oak surface. I'd been working on it for months, planning to surprise Jill with a piece that would hold all our important documents, photos, and mementos, a symbol of our life together. I picked up my hammer and considered my options. Instead, I set it down and walked back into the house. If Jill wanted to play games, she'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd spent 15 years in construction, learning that the best way to handle a rotten foundation was to tear it down completely and start over. But first, I needed more evidence, and I needed a plan. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom where Jill was already asleep, or pretending to be. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging. I could grab it, look through her messages, confirm what I already knew. But I didn't need to. The hotel receipt and the Facebook photos told me everything. My wife was cheating on me with her high school boyfriend, and she thought I was too stupid to figure it out. She was wrong about the stupid part, but she was about to find out just how wrong. The next morning, Jill left for work with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to pick up dinner on her way home. She was trying too hard to be normal, and it showed in every gesture. "I might be a little late," she said, adjusting her makeup in the hallway mirror. "We're doing inventory today." Inventory. On a Thursday, at a dental office that had maybe 50 patients on a busy week. "No problem," I said. "I'll probably grab a beer with Mike anyway." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sounds good. Love you." "Love you too." The lies came so easily now. We were both experts. After she left, I called Mike and told him to meet me at the construction site instead of the bar. I had work to do, and I needed someone to watch my back while I did it. Mike showed up with coffee and donuts because he was that kind of friend. Loyal, dependable, and completely unaware that my marriage was imploding. "So, what's eating you?" he asked, handing me a cup. "You sounded weird on the phone." I told him everything. The hotel receipt, the photos, the text messages, the lies. Mike listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Jesus, Cole," he said when I finished. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to handle it," I said. "But I need to be smart about it. You want me to talk to Brad? Explain the situation?" Mike was 6'4" and built like a linebacker. His version of talking usually involved someone getting their face rearranged. "No," I said. "I want you to help me move some things out of the house before she decides to clean me out." We spent the morning loading my truck with everything that mattered: my tools, my grandfather's workbench, the vintage motorcycle I'd been restoring, and all the electronics Jill had claimed she didn't care about. By law, I was entitled to half of everything we owned. I was just getting my half early. I also stopped by the bank and moved half our savings into a separate account. Not to hide it, just to protect it. If Jill wanted to play financial games, she'd have to play fair. The hardest part was the photos. 15 years of memories scattered across albums and frames. I took the ones that mattered to me and left the rest. Let her explain the gaps to Brad. By noon, I'd moved everything important to a storage unit across town. Mike helped me load the last box, shaking his head the whole time. "This is surreal," he said. "I mean, I knew you guys had problems, but I thought you were working through them." "So did I said. Turns out she was working through them with someone else. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I followed my wife. I parked across the street from her dental office and waited. At 5:30, she came out, but instead of heading home, she drove downtown. I followed her to the Marriott, the same hotel from the receipt. She parked and walked into the lobby like she owned the place, confident, happy, excited. I'd never seen her look that way when she was coming home to me. 20 minutes later, Brad Keaton arrived in his BMW. He was exactly what I'd expected, perfectly groomed, expensive clothes, the kind of smile that came from never having to worry about money. He looked like a man who'd never changed his own oil or fixed his own plumbing. He looked like everything I wasn't. I sat in my truck and watched them through the lobby windows. They hugged like old friends, but the hug lasted too long. They talked and laughed, and then they disappeared into the elevator together. I waited in the parking lot for 2 hours. When they came back down, they were holding hands. I drove home and sat in my empty garage, surrounded by the ghosts of my tools and workbench. The anniversary cabinet was still there, mocking me with its unfinished perfection. I picked up my phone and called a lawyer. "Daniels and Associates. How can I help you?" "I need to speak to someone about divorce," I said. The appointment was set for the next morning. I hung up and stared at the cabinet again. All those hours of careful work, measuring twice and cutting once, sanding every surface until it was smooth as glass. I picked up my hammer and destroyed it in 5 minutes. When Jill came home with Chinese takeout and a guilty smile, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a beer and a folder full of bank statements. "How was inventory?" I asked. "Exhausting," she said, setting the food on the counter. "But we got through it." She was still wearing the same clothes from this morning, but her hair was different, messier, and there was something else, a glow, a satisfaction that came from being desired by someone new. "I moved some things to storage today," I said casually. "Just clearing out the garage." She froze with her hand on the takeout bag. "What kind of things?" "Tools, mostly. Some old furniture, the motorcycle." "Why?" I looked at her directly for the first time since she'd walked in. "Because I'm moving out." The color drained from her face. "What are you talking about?" I pulled the hotel receipt from my pocket and set it on the table between us. She stared at it like it was a live snake. "I know about Brad," I said quietly. "I know about the hotels, the lies, the whole thing." She sat down heavily, her hands shaking. "Cole, I can explain." "No need," I said. "I've seen enough." "It's not what you think," she said, but her voice was weak. "We're just friends. We were just talking about old times." "For $243 at the Marriott?" She started crying then, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of anger at being caught. "You went through my purse," she said. "You spied on me." "You asked me to get your keys," I reminded her. "And yeah, I spied on you, because my wife was acting like a stranger." "I never meant for this to happen," she said. "Brad and we just reconnected, and he reminded me of who I used to be before." "Before what? Before you married me?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The silence said everything. I stood up and grabbed my jacket. I'll be staying at Mike's for a while. My lawyer will be in touch. Cole, wait, she called after me. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. You should have thought of that before you started working late with Brad. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear her crying, but it sounded like relief mixed with regret. Relief that the lies were over, regret that she'd been caught. I drove to Mike's house and knocked on his door. When he opened it, I said, "I need a place to stay for a while." "How long?" he asked. "Until I figure out how to destroy the man who destroyed my marriage." Mike stepped aside and let me in. This should be interesting. Mike's couch was about as comfortable as sleeping on a pile of 2x4s, but it beat sharing a bed with a liar. I'd been there 3 days when Donna called. "Cole, it's Donna. Jill's friend? I think we need to talk." This was interesting. Donna had been Jill's best friend since high school, her partner in gossip and shopping trips. If she was calling me, something had shifted. "What about?" I asked. "Can you meet me at Rosie's diner? Like, now?" Rosie's was neutral territory, a place where half the town ate breakfast and the other half ate lunch. If Donna wanted to meet there, she wanted witnesses. I found her in a back booth, nursing a coffee and looking like she'd been crying. She was a small woman with big hair and bigger opinions, the kind of person who knew everyone's business before they did. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me." "Depends what you want to talk about." She pulled out her phone and set it on the table. "Jill's been calling me nonstop since you left. She wants me to convince you to come home." "And?" "And I told her to go to hell." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not very best friend of you." "Best friends don't let best friends cheat on their husbands," she said. "Especially not with Brad Keaton." "You know Brad?" Donna laughed bitterly. "Honey, everyone knows Brad. He's been back in town for 2 months, and he's already tried to sleep with half the women at the country club, including me." Now we were getting somewhere. "What happened?" "He took me to dinner last month. Real fancy place, expensive wine, the whole show. Then he spent the entire evening talking about Jill, how beautiful she was in high school, how he'd never gotten over her, how he'd made a mistake letting her go." She took a sip of coffee and made a face. "I told him she was married, and he said that was just a temporary obstacle. Those were his exact words. Temporary obstacle." The anger in my chest grew hotter. Brad hadn't just seduced my wife, he'd planned it, targeted her, treated our marriage like a business problem to be solved. "There's more," Donna said. "He's been asking questions around town, about your business, your finances, your relationship with Jill, like he was doing research." "Research for what?" "For stealing your wife," she said bluntly. "He told me he was going to show Jill what she was missing, give her a taste of the good life." I thought about the photos on Facebook, Brad's expensive clothes and fancy car. He wasn't just offering Jill an affair, he was offering her an upgrade. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Donna's eyes flashed with anger. "Because I'm tired of watching good men get screwed over by people like Brad. My ex-husband left me for his secretary, and everyone in town acted like it was my fault, like I wasn't pretty enough or interesting enough to keep him." She leaned forward. "But you know what? Men like Brad and my ex, they don't want wives. They want trophies. And when the trophy gets old or damaged, they throw it away and get a new one." "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we make sure everyone in town knows exactly what kind of man Brad Keaton is." I studied her face. Donna was offering me an alliance, a partnership in revenge, and she had something I needed: access to the town gossip network. "What did you have in mind?" She smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Brad's having a little party this weekend, at his penthouse. He's invited half the town, trying to establish himself as some kind of social leader. And Jill's going to be there, as his date." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was one thing to know my wife was cheating, it was another to know she was flaunting it in front of our neighbors. "How do you know?" Because she asked me to help her pick out a dress, Donna said. She's so excited, Cole. She thinks she's won the lottery. I sat back and considered my options. I could stay away, let them have their party, file for divorce, and move on with my life. Or I could make sure that party became the most memorable night of their lives. What time does it start? I asked. 8 o'clock. But Cole, if you're thinking of crashing it, I'm not going to crash it, I said. I'm going to make it better. That afternoon, I made some phone calls. The first was to Jimmy Torres, who ran the local catering company. The second was to Pete Williams, who owned the town's only newspaper. The third was to Detective Kelly Stern, who'd gone to high school with all of us, and had a reputation for being fair but thorough. By Friday evening, everything was in place. Brad's party was exactly what I'd expected. Pretentious, overpriced, and full of people trying to impress each other. I knew because I was watching from the coffee shop across the street, along with Mike and 3 other guys from our construction crew. At 8:30, Jill arrived in a dress I'd never seen before. Red, expensive, and cut to show off everything she had. She looked beautiful and confident and completely unlike the woman I'd married. Brad met her at the building entrance with flowers and a kiss that lasted too long for a public street. They disappeared into the lobby, and I pulled out my phone. "It's time," I said. At 9 o'clock, Jimmy Torres arrived with a catering truck and started unloading food. Not the fancy appetizers Brad had ordered, but hot dogs, hamburgers, and beer. Lots of beer. At 9:15, Pete Williams showed up with his camera and a reporter from the county paper. At 9:30, Detective Stern arrived in her patrol car, and at 9:45, the real party started. Jimmy had done exactly what I'd asked him to do. He'd announced to everyone in the lobby that Brad Keaton was hosting a free barbecue for the entire town. First come, first served. Within minutes, the lobby was flooded with people. Not the country club crowd Brad had invited, but regular folks. Construction workers, shop clerks, retirees, families with kids. The kind of people who never got invited to penthouse parties. I watched from across the street as chaos erupted. Brad appeared in the lobby, still in his expensive suit, trying to explain to a crowd of hungry people that there had been some mistake. But Jimmy was already firing up the grills, and Pete was taking pictures of the community celebration. The best part was watching Jill try to navigate through the crowd in her red dress and high heels, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Detective Stern approached me as I stood on the sidewalk, grinning at the spectacle. "This is your doing, isn't it?" she asked. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said. "I just heard there was free food." She shook her head, but she was trying not to smile. "You know this is going to be all over social media by tomorrow." "Good," I said. "Everyone should know how generous Brad is." The party lasted until midnight. By the time it was over, half the town had eaten Brad's food, drunk his beer, and taken selfies in his lobby. The photos were already spreading across Facebook and Instagram, tagged with phrases like Brad's big heart and community spirit. Brad, of course, looked miserable in every single photo, but the best picture was the one Pete Williams took for the newspaper. Jill, standing alone in the corner of the lobby, her red dress wrinkled and her makeup smudged, looking like she'd just realized she'd made a terrible mistake. The caption read, "Local dental hygienist Jill Winsford enjoys the community barbecue hosted by newcomer Brad Keaton." I went home to Mike's couch that night with a smile on my face. It was the first time I'd smiled in weeks. The war was just beginning. The newspaper article hit the stands Saturday morning, and by noon, my phone was buzzing with calls and texts. Half the town had seen the photos of Brad's community barbecue, and everyone wanted to know the real story. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. The pictures spoke for themselves. Brad looking frustrated and out of place, Jill looking embarrassed and overdressed, and me nowhere to be seen. Let them draw their own conclusions. Mike was reading the article over coffee when I came downstairs. "You're evil," he said. but he was grinning. Poor Brad probably spent $5,000 feeding half the town. Money well spent, I said. Think of it as community outreach. My phone rang. Jill's name appeared on the screen. You need to answer that, Mike said. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to the message. Cole, we need to talk. What you did last night was cruel and embarrassing. Brad is a good man, and he doesn't deserve this. Neither do I. Call me back. I deleted the message and poured myself coffee. But Brad wasn't done. At 2 o'clock, he showed up at the construction site where I was working. Alone, which was either brave or stupid. We need to talk, he said, climbing out of his BMW. I set down my hammer and looked at him. In daylight, without his expensive clothes and perfect hair, he looked ordinary. Smaller. Like a man who'd never worked with his hands or built anything that lasted. About what? I asked. About your wife, he said. And about what happened last night. What about it? He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. It might have worked on someone who'd never faced down an angry subcontractor or dealt with a collapsed wall. You humiliated us, he said. In front of the entire town. I didn't do anything, I said. I heard there was free food and I told a few friends. Word gets around. Don't play dumb with me, Cole. I know you set this up. I shrugged. Prove it. His face flushed red. You're pathetic, you know that. Jill deserves better than this. Better than you. Funny, I said. If she deserved better, why did she marry me in the first place? Because she didn't know what she could have, he said. She settled for a contractor when she could have had someone who could give her the world. The words stung because they were probably true. Jill had married me when we were young and broke and full of dreams. Now she was looking at Brad's money and wondering what might have been. So give it to her, I said. After the divorce is final. Maybe I will, he said. Maybe I'll give her everything you never could. He turned to walk back to his car, but I called after him. Brad? He stopped and looked back. You might want to check your tires. He hurried to his BMW and found all 4 tires flat. Not slashed. That would have been vandalism. Just deflated, with the valve stems loosened. A 5-minute job with the right tools. You snake, he said. Weird, I said. Must be a problem with the parking lot. You should probably call AAA. I went back to work while he stood there fuming. It took 2 hours for the tow truck to arrive, and by then, half my crew had seen Brad Keaton stranded in a construction site parking lot, calling for help like a tourist. That evening, Detective Stern showed up at Mike's house. We need to talk, she said. We sat on Mike's front porch with beers and watched the sunset. Kelly had been a year behind me in high school, a smart girl who'd gone to college and come back to serve her community. She was fair but tough, and she didn't tolerate bullshit from anyone. Brad Keaton filed a complaint, she said. He thinks you're harassing him. What kind of harassment? The party thing last night? His flat tires today? He says you're stalking him. I took a sip of beer and considered my response. Did he mention that he's sleeping with my wife? He mentioned that you're separated, she said. But that doesn't give you the right to mess with his property. I didn't mess with anything. I told Jimmy Torres that Brad wanted to host a community barbecue, and Jimmy took it from there. As for the tires, maybe Brad should park in better neighborhoods. Kelly studied my face. Cole, I've known you since high school. You're not a troublemaker. But you're also not stupid. If you're planning something, think it through first. I'm not planning anything, I said. I'm just a guy going through a divorce. And Brad? Brad's just a guy who likes to take things that don't belong to him. She finished her beer and stood up. Just remember that revenge has a way of backfiring. Sometimes the person who gets hurt most is the one seeking it. After she left, Mike came outside and sat beside me. You think she's right? He asked. About what? About revenge backfiring. I thought about it for a long moment. Maybe. But some things are worth the risk. Like what? Like making sure everyone in town knows exactly what kind of man Brad Keaton is. Mike was quiet for a while. Then he said, "What do you need me to do?" "Help me throw a party of my own." Sunday morning, I called everyone I knew and invited them to a barbecue at Riverside Park. Nothing fancy, just burgers and beer and a chance to catch up with old friends. The kind of party Brad would never think to host. By noon, the park was full of people I'd known for years. Contractors, shop owners, teachers, mechanics, the backbone of our little town. People who worked with their hands and took care of their families and didn't have time for penthouse parties. And right in the middle of it all, I told them about Brad Keaton. Not directly. I wasn't stupid. But I mentioned how some people thought they could come to town and take whatever they wanted. How some people thought money made them better than everyone else. How some people had no respect for marriage or family or the bonds that held communities together. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. By the time the party was over, everyone knew the score. Brad Keaton was the outsider, the interloper, the man who thought he could buy his way into their town and their lives. And Jill? Jill was the woman who'd chosen him over one of their own. The next morning, I got a call from my lawyer. "The divorce papers are ready," he said. "We can file them today if you want." "File them?" I said. "What about settlement negotiations?" "No negotiations. She gets half of everything we built together. I get my freedom." "And the house?" I thought about the house where we'd lived for 10 years, the place where I'd built cabinets and fixed leaky faucets and painted every room at least twice. "She can have it," I said. "Let her figure out how to maintain it." That afternoon, a process server delivered the papers to Jill at work. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but Donna called me an hour later. "She's devastated," Donna said. "She thought you'd fight for her." "Why would I fight for someone who doesn't want to be fought for?" "She says she made a mistake. She wants to come home." "Tell her home is wherever Brad is now." "Cole." "Tell her," I said, and hung up. That night, Jill showed up at Mike's house. She looked terrible. Red eyes, messy hair, clothes that looked like she'd slept in them. She stood on the front porch and begged me to listen. "I made a mistake," she said. "A huge, stupid mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can start over. We can't do anything," I said. "You made your choice." "I choose you," she said. "I'm choosing you now." "Too late," I said. "You chose Brad when you went to that hotel. You chose him when you lied to my face. You chose him when you showed up at his party in a dress you bought with our money." She started crying then, the ugly kind of crying that comes from genuine regret. But regret wasn't enough. It was too little, too late. "Please," she said. "I love you." "You love the idea of me," I said. "You love having someone to fall back on when your fantasy doesn't work out. But you don't love me enough to be faithful to me." I closed the door and left her standing on the porch. Through the window, I watched her sit in her car for 20 minutes, crying and probably hoping I'd change my mind. I didn't. But as I watched her drive away, I realized something. Destroying her wasn't enough. She was just a woman who'd made bad choices. Brad was the one who'd deliberately targeted my marriage, who'd treated my wife like a prize to be won. Brad was the one who needed to learn what it felt like to lose everything, and I was just the man to teach him. Monday morning brought news that made my coffee taste like victory. Pete Williams called with an update that had the whole town talking. "You're going to love this," Pete said. "Brad's business partner saw the newspaper photos from his community barbecue. Turns out they're not thrilled about their investment manager being the center of a small-town scandal." "What kind of not thrilled?" "The kind where they're pulling their money and looking for new representation. Word is, Brad's lost about 60% of his client base since Saturday. I set down my coffee cup and grinned. That's unfortunate. Gets better. The building management company isn't happy either. Apparently, Brad's lease has a clause about maintaining the professional atmosphere of the building. Having half the town show up for an impromptu barbecue in the lobby violates that clause. So he's getting evicted? Let's just say his rent's about to go up significantly. After Pete hung up, I sat on Mike's porch and watched the morning traffic. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd hoped. Brad's perfect life was cracking apart, piece by piece, and he was starting to understand what it felt like to lose control. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, I drove to the Marriott where Jill and Brad had been meeting. The desk clerk was a kid named Tommy, whose father worked construction. I'd helped his family out a few years back when his dad was injured on the job. "Mr. Winsford?" Tommy said when he saw me. "How are you doing?" "I've been better," I said honestly. "Listen, I need a favor." I explained the situation without going into too much detail. Tommy's face darkened as he realized what I was telling him. "That's messed up, Mr. Winsford. I'm sorry." "I don't need sympathy," I said. "I need information. How long have they been meeting here?" Tommy glanced around the empty lobby, then leaned closer. "About 6 weeks. Always the same room, always paid for by the guy in the fancy car. But here's the thing. He's been bringing other women here too." "Other women?" "Yeah. Different woman every week. Sometimes twice a week. Your wife was just one of them." The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. It was one thing to know that Jill was cheating. It was another to know that she was just one name on Brad's list of conquests. "You sure about this?" Tommy nodded. "I work the evening shift most days. I see everything. The guy's like a machine. He's got a whole rotation going." I thanked Tommy and walked back to my truck, my hands shaking with rage. Brad hadn't just stolen my wife, he'd made her part of his collection. She probably thought she was special, that she was the only one, that he was going to leave his old life behind for her. She had no idea she was just another trophy. I called Donna. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "What kind of something?" "The kind that's going to save Jill from making the biggest mistake of her life." That evening, Donna arranged to meet Jill for dinner at Rosie's diner. I sat 3 booths away, close enough to hear everything but far enough away to avoid being seen. "You look terrible," Donna said as Jill sat down. "Thanks," Jill said sarcastically. "That's exactly what I needed to hear." "I'm serious. When's the last time you slept? Or ate a real meal?" Jill shrugged. "I've been staying with Brad. He's been taking care of me." "At his penthouse?" "Yeah. It's beautiful, Donna. You should see the view. And he's so attentive, so romantic. He makes me feel like I'm the only woman in the world." Donna pulled out her phone and set it on the table. "I need to show you something." She'd done exactly what I'd asked her to do. She'd spent the afternoon at the Marriott bar, taking photos of Brad with his other women. There were 3 different women, all meeting him on different days, all looking at him the same way Jill had looked at him. Jill stared at the photos in silence. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, denial, understanding, and finally, devastation. "When were these taken?" she asked quietly. "This week," Donna said, "while you were staying at his place." Jill's hands started shaking, but he told me I was special, that he'd been waiting for me all these years. "Honey, men like Brad don't wait for anyone. They collect." I watched Jill's world collapse in real time. All her dreams of a better life, of being rescued from her ordinary existence, crumbled with each photo Donna showed her. "I left Cole for this," she whispered. "I threw away 15 years of marriage for this." "Yeah," Donna said, "you did." "What am I going to do?" "You're going to figure it out," Donna said. "But first, you're going to stop feeling sorry for yourself and start dealing with reality." I left the diner before Jill saw me. I'd heard enough. She was finally beginning to understand what Brad really was and what she'd really lost. But understanding wasn't enough. I wanted Brad to feel the same devastation, the same humiliation, the same complete destruction of everything he thought he could control. Wednesday morning, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. I called every contractor, electrician, plumber, and repair service in town. I told them all the same story. Brad Keaton needed emergency repairs at his penthouse. Burst pipes, electrical problems, gas leaks, foundation issues, every possible disaster that could befall a building, and I told them all to arrive at the same time, Thursday morning at 8 o'clock. Then I called the building management company and reported multiple safety violations in Brad's unit. Nothing specific, just enough to require an immediate inspection. Finally, I called Pete Williams and told him there was going to be a newsworthy event at Brad's building Thursday morning. Something about emergency repairs and safety violations. Thursday morning, I positioned myself across the street with a cup of coffee and a perfect view of the chaos about to unfold. At 8 o'clock sharp, 20 different service trucks arrived at Brad's building. Plumbers, electricians, roofers, HVAC specialists, exterminators, all of them convinced they were responding to emergency calls from Brad Keaton. At 8:15, the building inspector arrived. At 8:30, Pete Williams showed up with his camera, and at 8:45, Brad appeared in the lobby in his bathrobe, screaming at anyone who would listen that he hadn't called for any repairs. But the damage was done. The lobby was full of confused contractors, the building inspector was taking notes about resident complaints, and Pete was photographing the whole thing for tomorrow's newspaper. The headline would read, "Penthouse Problems. Local businessman faces building code violations." I finished my coffee and walked away, leaving Brad to explain to 20 angry contractors why they'd wasted their morning on a false alarm. My phone rang as I reached my truck. It was Detective Stern. "Cole, we need to talk, now." I met her at the police station where she led me to an interview room and closed the door. "Brad Keaton is filing harassment charges," she said. "He's got a list of incidents going back 2 weeks, and he's convinced you're behind all of them." "What kind of incidents?" She read from a file. "Unauthorized party at his residence, property damage to his vehicle, false emergency calls to his building, and systematic harassment designed to damage his reputation and business relationships." "That's a lot of accusations," I said. "Can he prove any of them?" "He doesn't need to prove them in court," she said. "He just needs to convince a judge to issue a restraining order, and based on this list, he might be able to do it." I leaned back in my chair and considered my options. I could deny everything, but Kelly was too smart to believe that. I could admit to some of it and claim it was justified, but that would only make things worse. Or I could tell her the truth. "Kelly," I said, "what would you do if someone deliberately destroyed your marriage?" "I'd file for divorce and move on with my life." "What if they did it just because they could? What if they treated your spouse like a trophy to be won, and your marriage like an obstacle to be removed?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I'd probably want to hurt them back." "But you wouldn't do it because you're a cop, and you believe in the system." "That's right." "Well, I'm not a cop," I said. "And the system doesn't have a remedy for what Brad did to me." "So you took matters into your own hands." "I made sure everyone in town knew exactly what kind of man Brad Keaton is. I didn't break any laws, I didn't hurt anyone, and I didn't damage any property that couldn't be easily repaired." Kelly studied my face. "You know this has to stop, right? Whatever you're planning next, it has to stop." "It's already stopped," I said. "Brad's lost his clients, his reputation, and his perfect life. Jill's figured out what he really is. I've got my divorce papers filed and my new life planned out." "So you're done?" I stood up and headed for the door. "I'm done with Brad Keaton. But if he wants to keep playing games, he should remember that I know this town a lot better than he does. Cole, and I've got a lot more friends here than he'll ever have." I left the police station and drove to Mike's house, where I found him waiting on the porch with 2 beers and a newspaper. "You made the front page again," he said, handing me the paper. The photo showed Brad in his bathrobe, surrounded by contractors and looking like a man who'd lost control of his entire life. The article detailed the confusion about emergency repairs and mentioned the ongoing building code investigation. "Think he'll get the message?" Mike asked. "He'd better," I said, "because this is his last warning." That night, Brad proved he was dumber than I'd thought. Instead of cutting his losses and leaving town, he decided to make one final play for respect. He threw another party. This time, he hired security guards and made sure only his invited guests could get in. He wanted to prove that he was still the sophisticated outsider, still the man with money and connections and power. But he'd forgotten the most important rule of small-town politics. You can't buy respect, and you can't force people to like you. I didn't crash his party. I didn't need to. By 10 o'clock, half his guests had left. By 11, the other half were talking about leaving. By midnight, Brad was standing alone in his penthouse, surrounded by expensive food and imported wine, with no one left to impress. The next morning, he packed his BMW and left town. He didn't say goodbye to Jill. He didn't settle his accounts with local businesses. He just disappeared, like the coward he'd always been. Jill called me that afternoon, crying and begging for another chance. But I was done with second chances, done with rebuilding something that had been deliberately destroyed. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry." "I know you are," I said, "but sorry doesn't fix 15 years of trust." "What am I supposed to do now?" "Figure it out," I said. Like I had to. I hung up and looked around Mike's living room, where I'd been sleeping on the couch for 2 weeks. Tomorrow, I was moving into my own apartment. Next week, I was starting my own contracting business. Next month, I was beginning a new life. Brad Keaton had tried to destroy me, but he'd only made me stronger. He'd tried to steal my wife, but he'd only shown me what our marriage really was. He'd tried to humiliate me in front of my community, but he'd only proven that I belonged here more than he ever would. Some battles are worth fighting, even if you lose everything in the process. But the best battles are the ones where you discover you haven't lost anything worth keeping. I raised my beer in a toast to the empty room. "Here's to parking lot karma, Brad. Hope it was worth the ride."